Okay, so this is joint work with Riccardo Focardi, Matus Nemeth, Elvise Rabitti, and Marco Squarcina. So, as you all know, HTTP is a protocol which is not secure. Doesn't provide any level of security in terms of confidentiality, in terms of integrity. But luckily, it is going to be replaced really soon by HTTPS. So we observe a major increase in the adoption of HTTPS in the last few years. And there are several reasons for this. One of the reasons is that now it is very easy to get access to trusted certificates, thanks to authorities like Let's Encrypt. And then we observe that major web browsers are really pushing for a better HTTPS adoption by marking HTTP as insecure directly in the address bar. And based on data from Mozilla, we observe that the amount of web traffic which is encrypting now is higher than the amount of web traffic which is not encrypted. So this means basically that we can be happy to safely use Wi-Fi everywhere. At the base of this work, we have this question: can we really trust HTTPS? And the reason behind this is that, of course, HTTPS is much better than HTTP, but there are plenty of attacks which have been published against TLS, which is the cryptographic protocol behind the security of HTTPS. You can see a few logos of infamous attacks against TLS in this slide. As you can see, we have attacks like Drown, a robot, which operates thanks to cryptographic weaknesses in implementation. And then we have nasty bugs like Heartbleed, which can reveal cryptographic keys. And all these attacks can completely compromise the security of HTTPS. And you might think that these attacks are so severe that they have been fixed on major websites. So we should not care about these attacks anymore. But our observation here is that the web is a very complicated and interconnected ecosystem. And the security of a website is actually a function of the security of many other websites. In particular, what we observe is that TLS vulnerabilities get amplified in the web ecosystem. You can see a picture here, which we built from using our analysis tool. So this is actually a picture of a real website. You can see in the center of the picture we have a gray circle, which is the main site. But you can see that this site is loading content from many other different hosts, which are the white circles in the picture. Also, the security of the website depends on the security of its subdomains, in particular when it comes to authentication credentials like cookies. And these are the gray circles in the picture. You can see there is a very complicated ecosystem with a lot of inclusion. So the main site is loading from many other hosts. And the striped hosts are hosts which suffer from some TLS vulnerability. So you can see in this case, we have a website which is apparently secure. It doesn't suffer from any TLS vulnerability. But since it loads stuff from other websites which are broken, it is eventually compromised. So what we did in our work was to take a systematic look at this class of problems. So what we did is, first of all, reviewing most of the existing attacks against TLS. And we identified those which still work in modern clients, so in modern browsers. And we characterized these attacks in terms of attack trees. We defined very precisely the conditions which are needed for the attack to work. After defining these attacks, we built a tool which is an analysis platform for web application. And the idea of the tool is that the tool collects data for a bunch of relevant hosts. It will be clear what I mean later, but as you can already see from the previous slide, the security of a website depends on many other hosts from which contents are loaded, for instance. And then we use existing tools to analyze these other hosts and build a security report. We use our platform to carry out a large-scale analysis of the web. And we focus in particular on 3 different aspects. We focus on page integrity, so the possibility for an attacker to inject content in the page and in particular scripts. Then we focus on the security of authentication credentials, and I will discuss in particular cookies. And then we will reason about the security implication of web tracking and broken TLS implementation in popular web trackers. To sum up, I can say that this is the first quantitative analysis of the impact of TLS vulnerabilities on web application security. This is the first contribution of our work. So we start by reviewing known attacks against TLS, and we characterize these attacks using attack trees, which are roughly Boolean formulas which can be used to express attack condition. You can see an example of a simple attack tree in the right part of the slide. So let's assume that the goal of the attacker is learning the session key, so that the attacker might be able to eventually decrypt the traffic. This is possible if the attacker is able to decrypt the RSA key exchange offline, which in turn is again possible if two conditions are true. The first condition is that an RSA key exchange is used, and this is only possible if either RSA used in the highest TLS version, or it is possible to force a downgrade to a TLS version which prefers RSA. And the second condition, which must be true for the attack to work, is that there is an RSA decryption oracle which is available on the target host, or on a host with the same certificate, or on a host with the same public RSA key. We developed this kind of attack trees, and by building on top of that, we characterize a family of insecure channels. So we have channels which are tainted, which means in particular that these channels suffer from confidentiality and integrity issues, which might allow the attacker to run man-in-the-middle attacks, so to be in the middle of the communication and read and modify everything which is sent despite the use of HTTPS. Then we have leaky channels, which are not, let's say, as broken as to allow man-in-the-middle attacks, but still allow decryption. So if something is sent there, the attacker might be able to recover the content at some point. And then we have a class of partially leaky channels, which are channels which suffer from side channels vulnerabilities, which means that you can leak secrets sent over the channel, for instance, 1 bit at a time. So if a same secret is sent over the channel multiple times, you might be able to exfiltrate the full secret by using the side channel. This is a useful abstraction layer, which we use to reason about security issues in web applications. So we don't care on why a channel is broken, but we try to reason on what happens when the channel is broken. If you're interested in this part of the work, you can see the paper for full details. This is our methodology. The idea is that we access the website we want to analyze using headless Chrome. We collect a bunch of information, including the serialized DOM of the page, cookies, and all the hosts which serve sub-resources to the page, like scripts, images, etc. We then run subdomain enumeration on the main website to find other security-relevant hosts which are important for our analysis. And after collecting all this information, we run existing TLS analysis tools on the collected host. We map the output of such tools to the condition of the attack trees, so we are able to identify the presence of leaky channels, tainted channels, and partially leaky channels there. And we use all this information to build a security report. What is interesting, in my opinion, is that in our analysis, we scanned 10K websites from Alexa, and we eventually had to scan more than 100K hosts. So it means that indeed there is an amplification of the attack surface against this website. We want to analyze 10K, but we eventually analyze more than 100K hosts. These are a few preliminary statistics. So we were able to find the TLS vulnerabilities in more than 5K hosts, which is roughly the 5% of our data set. You can see the breakdown in the table. You can see that tainted channels are the most represented here, but you can also find the presence of leaky channel, partially leaky channel. You can say that these numbers are somewhat concerning, but they don't tell much about web application security. And the impact of this number on web application security is actually the main contribution of our work. And so let me start by discussing the first issue, which we analyze in detail in our paper, which is the problem of page integrity. So let's assume we have a web page, and this web page loads JavaScript from 2 different hosts. The first host is fine, but the second host is broken because it suffers from a TLS vulnerability, which allows the attacker to inject content over the channel. What we observe in practice is that around 900 web pages are at the danger of script injection due to the presence of tainted channels. And what I find interesting in particular is that in the large majority of cases, the problem is not on the homepage itself, but the problem is due to the inclusion of scripts over tainted channels. So it means that the main host is fine, but it loads stuff from other hosts which are actually broken. And this is the case for the 75% of the website we analyzed. We can, in principle, defend against these attacks by using sub-resource integrity, because you can provide an hash of a script for the browser to check. But what we observe in practice is that at the moment, the adoption of SRI is really ineffective. SRI is not really used on many websites, and even websites which make use of SRI do not actually patch all the possible channels for content inclusion. Another interesting takeaway from this part of the analysis is that there are a few popular a script provider which lead to a vulnerability amplification, because many websites load content from this script provider, but these script providers are broken. Here you have a couple of examples. You can see that around 200 home pages are broken by the inclusion of scripts served by a vulnerable host of Baidu. And we have more than 100 home pages which include content from a vulnerable host owned by LinkedIn. A second aspect we analyze is the use of cookies. Cookies are the cornerstone of client authentication on the web. They're a security critical component. They can be set as a host only, which means that the host will set the cookie for itself. But most of the times, cookies are set as domain cookies, which means that they're shared across different subdomains. The implication of this choice is that the attack surface against cookies is particularly large. There are several tricky considerations to be done when it comes to cookies. In terms of confidentiality, we have to be careful about this domain sharing, because it means that if a cookie is shared between multiple subdomains, a vulnerability of a single subdomain might be enough for the attacker to disclose the cookie value. And if the attacker discloses the cookie value, it might be eventually able to impersonate the victim, which is the owner of the cookie. Then, since cookies can be forced to be sent by the attacker by forging HTTP traffic, it means that for exfiltrating cookie, partially leaky channels are good enough. So the attacker can use these simple side channels to leak cookie values by forcing a lot of web traffic. So cookies are particularly vulnerable in this respect. And it is also possible for the attacker to steal cookies by injecting script inside pages, because scripts can normally access cookies unless these cookies are marked with the HTTP only attribute. So the attack surface against cookies is particularly high. And similar consideration applies to integrity, because also in the case of integrity consideration, the subdomains can set cookies for the main website. And it is possible to mitigate this issue by using the host prefix, which forces cookie to be set without the domain attribute, so without any form of domain sharing. But as we will see, this is not very commonly used in the web at the time being. These are a few numbers. So you can see the percentage of cookies on which we were able to find a confidentiality or integrity issue due to the presence of some TLS vulnerability. As you can see from the table, the attack surface against domain cookies is much larger than for host-only cookies. As I said, since domain cookies are shared between multiple hosts, it is much easier to attack them. So we find roughly double the number of vulnerable cookies if we just focus on the percentage. And in particular, we observe that for more than 400 websites, all the session cookies have low confidentiality. So it means we use some heuristic to detect session cookies. But what we observe is that it is very easy to have a possibility of session hijacking of this prominent website. If we could mark all this cookie with the HTTP-only attribute, we would significantly limit the attack surface, because the number of vulnerable websites will be around half of this number. But of course, this might have an impact on compatibility. So we cannot just stipulate that this cookie cannot be accessed by JavaScript, and at the same time being sure that this is not going to break website. Then we observe that more than 500 websites have session cookies, all of which have low integrity. In principle, we can mitigate this issue by using the host prefix. And in particular, this will help in more than 100 cases. But we observe that only one website in our dataset is using the host prefix to prevent cookie sharing between subdomains. And we also estimated that there are a few cases, 22, where it is possible to deploy the host prefix without breaking compatibility, but the websites are not doing so. Last part of the analysis is related to the web tracking. In particular, we start from the observation that TLS vulnerabilities in popular trackers might enable privacy leaks. In particular, if tracking cookies are sent over leaky channels, the attacker might be able to build cross-site navigation profiles of users. And this issue can be amplified if the attacker can actually force scripts to load this content from the trackers in other pages. We have a similar analysis for tracking cookies published at the WWW in 2015. But that analysis focused on HTTP traffic. Here, instead, we focus on HTTPS traffic, which is not completely secure due to the presence of vulnerability, but the methodology is pretty similar. Here a few examples. These are examples of hosts which are vulnerable. These are used by trackers. And they are very popular because you can see that they're included by many different hosts. And we estimate, based on the numbers that we have in the paper, that attacking a single publisher alone, like PubMatic, will allow profiling over more than 140 websites. And the attack can be amplified if the attacker plays the active role of injecting scripts in error pages. And it is possible, in particular, to increase the profiling to almost 1,000 websites. So to conclude, HTTPS is essential for web application security, but it is not a final solution. In particular, we have to ensure that HTTPS is deployed correctly. Otherwise, attacker might be able to exploit TLS vulnerability to run nasty attacks. We have seen some of the attacks in this talk. In particular, we estimated the page integrity issues in 10% of the home pages, which we analyzed. And we observed that in most cases, these issues are related to remote script inclusion. So the main host is fine, but the home page is loading stuff from hosts which deploy HTTPS insecurely. In the case of session cookies, we found that it is very easy to leak cookies through broken TLS channels. And very likely this is due to the fact that these cookies are shared between subdomains, so they have a very large attack surface. And in 13% of the website, we found problems similar to cookie forcing, where the attacker might be able to compromise cookie integrity. It is possible to reduce attack surface for this by using the host prefix for cookies, but no one is using it basically as of now. And finally, we analyzed web tracking. And we observed that broken TLS implementation in web trackers can be used to build accurate cross-site navigation profiles across different websites. And a single leaky tracker enables profiling on more than 140 websites. And it is possible to make this attack stronger by exploiting script injection. So let's say the main goal of our research was showing that even if we move to full HTTPS, TLS vulnerabilities can still represent a serious issue to the security of the deployment. And we want to really reason on how to improve on this state of the art. In particular, the upcoming release of TLS 1.3 in major browsers will definitely help in improving this situation. So very briefly to conclude, we are currently looking for internships because we are still developing this tool in collaboration with CryptoSense because we want to release the tool as a web application for people to use. So if you are interested in developing work on these kind of topics, you can contact me or Riccardo Focardi at these addresses. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, Stefano. Questions? Line up at the microphones and fire away with your questions. Until you get up, let me ask one. So you said that for the quantitative analysis that you did, you had to start out with those attack trees. Can you shed a word or two on how you came up with those trees? What's the process for doing that?
Yeah. So basically, the construction of the attack trees are based on extensive literature of the review, an extensive review of the literature. And you can see an example in this slide. What we did was take an assumption that the user is navigating the web using a modern client. So we have some strict requirement by Mozilla, which is called the modern compatibility requirement for TLS security. So we assume that the user is accessing the web from a client which is updated. And based on this, we identify conditions for attacks which fall into this category to be true. And we estimate the presence of this kind of vulnerabilities by scanning hosts and mapping the output of known tools like TLS attacker against the condition of the attack trees. That's roughly the idea.
Hey, Thomas Kerber, University of Edinburgh. I wanted to ask, what sampling set of websites did you use? Because you throw a lot of numbers around, but I don't know what the corresponding reference is.
Okay, so we accessed Alexa website. So we took the top 100K, and then we started sample out until we get 10K websites, all of which are deployed on top of HTTPS. So that's the setting. We used the Alexa list, which was the most updated when we performed our investigation.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? If not, then let's thank Stefano once again, and I think we're due for a break. Thank you, everyone.